Hey everyone, it's Sevy. With Geo getting the spotlight in the second half of 2.3, it's time to give our dutiful maid Noelle some love. She's an all-in-one that tanks, heals, and sweeps up mobs of enemies. It's unbelievable she's not yet an official Knight of Favonius. If you're thinking of building her or are in the middle of doing so, this guide's for you. I'll be discussing her gameplay, constellations, best builds and teammates, and pros and cons to maximize her potential and hopefully make her worthy of becoming an official Knight. Let's begin! If I were to describe her role, she's technically a main DPS that happens to be also a healer and tank. I say tank and not necessarily shielder because while she technically shields, it's meant to protect her more than her allies. So how does her kit and gameplay work? Noelle's burst is the core part of her DPS role. It basically extends the range and AoE of her normal attacks by a lot and converts it into geo damage, which cannot be overridden by other elemental infusions. Along with that, her burst converts a percentage of Noelle's defense stat into attack. Noelle's burst snapshots her defense stat and consequently the amount of defense that gets converted into attack. However, Noelle's burst does not snapshot other stats such as her attack and geo damage bonus. That means with her burst state active, any attack or geo damage bonus changes will be reflected when dealing damage, like Bennett's attack buff or Ningguang's geo damage buff. One thing I absolutely love about Noelle is that unlike characters such as Xiao, Hu Tao, and Yoimiya's enhanced states, Noelle's burst state remains even after switching her out and in. The timer of her burst is still running, but it doesn't get cut short by switching. Finally, to break down her damage scaling on her burst. The burst damage and skill damage on the attribute scaling page refers to the initial damage from casting her burst and the following first swing that Noelle performs. The rest of her attacks in that state depend on her auto attack scaling, so her main damage counts as normal attack damage. So keep in mind that things like Raiden's buff, Aquamaru's passive, or the Noblesse 2-piece effect do not increase her burst auto attack damage. Noelle's skill breastplate is complementary to making her an all-in-one unit. It's a shield that scales off of her defense in both the initial damage it deals and in the damage it can absorb. When her shield is on, and she performs auto attacks both during her burst and outside of it, she has a certain probability to do full party healing. The amount of HP healed per hit also scales from her defense. The duration of her skill is 12 seconds while the cooldown is 24. However, her second passive talent decreases her skill cooldown by 1 second for every 4 hits she accomplishes while her shield is up. Her first passive talent creates an emergency shield when the on-field character falls below 30% HP, and the damage absorption of that shield is 400% of Noelle's defense. It's nice knowing Noelle has your back when you're in danger. I've seen some people voicing a certain concern about Noelle's shield. Why is it so tanky when she's using it, but on other characters not so much? The answer is because of Noelle's defense stat. Since you're supposed to build her with high defense, a high defense stat decreases the amount of damage she takes, which means her shield will be worn down slower. Characters with lower defense stats will take more damage, wearing down the shield faster when they're in it. So considering Noelle's talents, their priority as a DPS should be auto attacks and burst first, then skill, but you want to get them all to level 6 at least. Now for her biggest problem, energy. Her skill actually doesn't generate any energy particles. It's necessary to have some ER stats on her and a Geo Battery teammate. Since her DPS utility is heavily locked in her burst form, she needs to reliably be able to activate her burst. Even if it costs 60, her lack of self-energy regeneration makes it feel like it's 80. Her other huge disadvantage is her lack of single target damage. While she works well as an AoE DPS, her single target damage is subpar because that's not what she was made for. Beat mobs of enemies with her and it's fun, but once you go up against single bosses with loads of HP, you'll be able to beat them of course, so it definitely isn't as fast as dedicated main carries. Still, she does her job as a dutiful maid should, keeping your team alive while sweeping up the enemies. She doesn't have the best shield strength nor the best healing rate, definitely not the best damage, but the fact that she simultaneously tanks, heals, and damages all at once while actually being fairly good at them is quite a combo. Now let's see what constellations add to her kit. C1 makes Noelle a very reliable healer now. Now she has a 100% chance to heal as long as her burst and shield are active at the same time, which is when you'll use her on field most of the time anyway. C2 makes her an even funner Beyblade to spin around with. Coupled with C1, she practically is a spinning healing machine. C3 increases her skill for more shielding and healing benefits. C4 basically makes her shield a literal C4 bomb. When it expires or gets destroyed, it deals geo damage that scales off her attack. Now, since the damage scales off her attack and not defense, the shield should ideally explode while she's in her burst state, since that's when her attack is buffed. If it explodes outside of her burst, the damage it'll deal will be quite small. C5 increases her burst talents for even better burst buffs and damage. C6 is where even more magic happens. First, it further increases the attack buff given by your burst by 50% of her defense, which almost doubles the attack added. This means that she'll do even crazier damage. And second, it increases the duration of your burst by 1 second for every enemy you defeat, by a maximum of up to 10 seconds. This means the duration can reach up to 25 seconds, much longer than the cooldown, and if you battery Noelle properly, she can have high uptime on her burst. Some players wait until she's at C6 before they build her, myself included, since this is where much of her potential shines. Of course, you don't have to wait for C6 to start building and using her. She'll be a great tank, shield, and healer until then, but obviously she'll yield better damage results with C6. The decision is up to you. Now when it comes to her artifact main stats, there are some variations to consider. If you don't have her at C6, your sans is still attack or defense. Just pick either the one with better substats or what completes your target set. At C6 though, the end goal is clearly a defense sans. As for the goblet, geo damage is the superior choice for damage. However, temporarily using a defense goblet is still viable, and while it yields less damage, at least you get more healing and shield tankiness. As for the circlet, either crit rate or crit damage will do depending on your rolls or weapon. The goal is to get her crit stats at least 50 to 100%. There's also a case for using a defense circlet temporarily, which again is less damage but more tankiness and healing. What about her energy recharge? I found that with a Geo battery, I can get by with at least 130% ER for almost constant burst uptime. It doesn't hurt to have a bit more as long as her other stats are still good, but I personally wouldn't fully recommend settling with an ER sans since that's a lot of defense benefits lost, even if you do get the better burst uptime. It might be okay temporarily, but that's not the end goal. Instead, you'll want to get the ER stats you need from the substats as much as possible. Of course, this depends on how lucky you are with artifacts. For lower AR players, you can temporarily use these sets. A 2-piece Defender's Will is an easy choice since that additional defense improves all aspects of her kit. You can mix this in with a 2-piece Exile or 2-piece Scholar for additional energy recharge, which means better burst uptime, or a 2-piece Martial Artist for more auto attack damage, or a 2-piece Berserker for more crit rate. But of course, prioritize stats over set bonuses. For the endgame artifact choices, it's a contest between these three. 4-piece Gladiator's Finale, 4-piece Retracing Bolide, and now the 4-piece Husk of Opulent Dreams. All these have their own pros and cons. Starting with a Gladiator set, it's only really an option if you've managed to accumulate good Noelle pieces from all your boss farming, or you got good pieces from the Artifact Strongbox conversion. So you shouldn't unnecessarily farm bosses or go crazy on feeding artifacts just to get this set. Its biggest pro is that it conveniently gives you an outright 35% damage bonus to normal attacks, which, unlike the other options, is non-conditional, so it's the most convenient buff. However, the downsides are that the 18% attack bonus isn't as beneficial as the other set's 2-piece effects. Also, the damage bonus doesn't improve her charged attack, which is a shame if you want to spin with her. It's a solid choice, and the damage difference isn't that far off from Bolide or Husk. Bolide improves from Glad in that the 4-piece damage bonus, aside from being slightly higher, now affects her charged attack as well. The 2-piece effect is also very helpful to improve Noelle's tankiness. Her shield by itself isn't exactly the strongest compared to top shielders, but Bolide compensates for that. The disadvantage though is that the damage bonus applies only if you're protected by a shield. While Noelle should be shielded at all times, whether from her own skill, her teammate's shield, or from crystallized shield, there's still a chance that you'll have shield downtime. This means it's one condition you need to be conscious of. Incidentally, it prolongs your shield, which means that your C4 explosion has to wait a little longer. Something to keep in mind. So between Bolide and Glad, you can't go wrong with either as long as you understand the trade-offs of both. When it comes to damage difference, it's negligible and dependent on stat luck. The major difference is whether you want convenience or tankiness. I personally like Glad more since it's something I happen to get from boss fights, the effects are completely unconditional, and I mostly use her normal attacks anyway. That's personal preference though. Now, with a new Husk set, it's technically her best in slot. It increases her defense by a lot, which translates to healing, shield strength, and damage, along with increasing her geo damage. The biggest thing you have to be mindful of is managing the stacks. Remember that her burst snapshots the defense stat when adding to her attack. So to maximize the burst buff, you'll want to keep Noelle off the field for a bit to passively gain the stacks. Then you can switch to her, use her shield to deal geo damage to get 1 stack if it's not maxed yet, then activate her burst to snapshot the 54% defense bonus from the artifact set. In terms of damage output, it's marginally better than the previous options, more or less 5% from what I've simulated. If you don't have any existing good Glad or Bolide pieces, you can start farming for the Husk instead. Now for Noelle's weapons. For her best free-to-play weapon, the White Blind is the obvious choice. It's weird that it's not really aesthetically as good on Noelle considering she's literally the only candidate for it aside from shield bot Xinyan. Anyway, the great thing about this is how it adds a lot of defense from its substat and effect. The trick with this is to attack with it 4 times to ideally get the max buff stacks before using your shield or burst to snapshot the defense stat. There's also the option of running her with a Favonius Greatsword, which practically gives her better burst uptime and helps battery her, though it won't improve her defense scaling talents. It's not as good in terms of damage, and replacing it with a White Blind will yield overall better results, and you can just get the needed ER from substat rolls and team batteries. The best in slot but paid upgrade on Noelle would be the Serpent Spine, and if it's damage you want, the Serpent Spine will outdamage even a high refinement White Blind. You lose a bit of defense, so her healing and shields won't be as robust, but the damage increase from its max stacks will pull ahead of White Blinds. The crit rate also makes it so much easier to build her crit stats. On Spiral Abyss, I just make her the first active character so that you can wait for a few seconds before starting the floor in order to get the max stacks. As for the other 5-star options such as Wolf's Gravestone and the Unforged, they're good on a non-C6 Noelle, but at C6 they're less recommendable. While the Unforged does give shield strength to help Noelle's tankiness, its DPS still gets beaten by a Serpent Spine at equal refinements. There's also the Skyward Pride, which, like the Favonius Greatsword, helps address her ER needs and which generates these vacuum blades for additional physical damage. Still, I'd personally recommend the White Blind at higher refinements for more benefits. But finally, we have the soon-to-arrive Redhorn Stone Thresher for Noelle, and while it's meant to be Ito's weapon, it will definitely work wonders on Noelle too, as a similar defense scaling unit. As of now, there are no final stats to work with, but when it finally drops, I'll try to make an update video looking at how well it performs on her, especially versus the Serpent Spine. Now for team comps. The main thing Noelle needs from teammates is battery, buffs, and extra damage. Let's start with Geo teammates, which is a necessity. First, they give Geo Resonance, which increases damage and shreds enemy resistance. Second, Geo teammates are Noelle's best batteries, and topping that list are Geo MC and Ningguang, preferably with C2. Geo MC can quickly generate lots of Geo particles with their skill and buffs crit rate with their burst. Ningguang's Jade Shield gives 12% Geo damage, so Noelle can use that, and the C2 makes her skill more spammable as long as you wait 6 seconds, since Ningguang has a skill ICD on energy generation. And if Noelle experiences downtime with her burst, you can switch to Ningguang as a main DPS to deal high single target damage. Albedo's another great choice as a good battery and for amazing off-field damage. I personally use Albedo a lot with Noelle. Zhongli is of course another amazing Geo support for added tankiness and his Jade Shield's resistance shred. Now there's Goro, who delivers defense and geo damage buffs. I got to try out Noelle with Goro in his hangout quest and it was effective. Even if you don't plan on pulling for Ito, Goro is a top 4-star support for Noelle mains to have. Once you have Goro, he and Noelle will be almost inseparable for a mono geo team. Outside of Geo, you really want sub DPS supports that can provide more off-field damage while Noelle's doing her thing. Fischl or Beidou are great for off-field damage. One advantage of Fischl is that she has a passive that deals extra electro damage when your active character causes an electro reaction, and since Noelle will proc a lot of Crystallize, Fischl's passive will proc quite often. You can also take advantage of Cryo Resonance for some extra crit rate. Rosaria and Kaya are good off-field supports, and Rosaria can even share more crit rate to your Noelle. I sometimes put Bennett with her so I can see even bigger damage numbers. Chongyun is also an interesting option to decrease her cooldown times and increase attack speed. That's it for this updated Noelle build guide. I hope this helps you become a Noelle main or at least give your favorite Geo maid some love, especially with Geo mains having a lot of fun this entire patch. Comment down below if Noelle is on your list of 2 build characters, or if there are other team comps you like to play her in. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you soon. Take care!